All right, I think we'll get started. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Michael Pascoe. Sorry, got someone's sound coming through. Okay, thanks. Okay, so my name's Michael Pascoe. I'm here with Jerome Brown, and today's webinar is about using Azure to make your organisation or to help enable your organisation to be more agile. So the agenda for today would be a very short introduction about Olica, and then I'd like to talk about why are you moving to cloud, because that should frame the steps that you take and the order that you kind of approach a cloud migration. And then Jerome will take us through Olica's 10 steps for Azure migrations. And then I'll just round out at the end and loop back to some of the opportunities that you have for your organization once you're in a public cloud like Azure. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask them via the chat interface and we'll try to address them as we go. So a little about Olica. We are about 8 years old, founded in 2011. We've got a little over 40 staff currently and growing quite rapidly at this point in time. We have strong expertise in government and enterprise and large organisations, and we understand in those larger organisations and we're quite adept at navigating the process that you have and working into your robust change management processes, etc. But we as a company are quite small and agile and modern. So essentially this combination allows us to bring more innovative ideas and fresh approaches, but into an environment that is much larger than our organisation. So we're able to both adapt to the integration needs and run robust, reliable projects, but also bring a little bit of inventiveness to the process through the agility that we have in our organisation. We really strive to be responsive, not just fast, but also adaptable and agile. We are very happy to flex to your requirements and needs. We will not bring the same solutions, the cookie cutter solutions, and do the same thing over and over for different people. We will be creative and look at your environment uniquely, and we genuinely care about the work that we do and the outcomes it achieves for you. We've got, through all of that, a large set of great customers, many of which you probably would be familiar with the brand names there as well. And we are on a mission to make a difference for your organisations. We integrate technology to deliver innovative solutions that empower people and genuinely change Australian organisations. And one of those solutions set is based on cloud. So let's get into the content for today. So for decades, IT has been working its way up the stack. It's been abstracting layers of complexity, making it simpler, and lower level functions that used to take a lot of time and focus have progressively got easier and easier and easier. Think about networking. Think how often do you think about NICs and drivers and how difficult in the past routing and connectivity between sites was. It's all getting easier and easier. And with systems management, patching and config changes and upgrades, they used to be very time consuming and extremely difficult to implement, and we made them easier and easier. So we have this history of abstracting more and more, and this history of outsourcing to others the basic things so that we can do the unique things on top. And I suppose in a modern era, we've seen that happen even with applications, as applications have been outsourced and made easier and easier for us to manage and utilize via SaaS platforms. So if you think about cloud, fundamentally, cloud was born through this evolution of abstracting and making it a little bit easier, outsourcing some of those functions. So essentially, it is an evolutionary step. It's a significant step, but it was born through evolution. However, we really believe that it does provide an opportunity to be revolutionary and not just, someone else's data center, a way of optimizing slightly. It's got this potential to be something extremely different for your organization if that potential is embraced. So how do you embrace that? Well, you've got to get to cloud. So what's your path to cloud? And we really believe that each organization's path to cloud is different depending on what you are wanting to achieve. And there's so many things that are beneficial in a cloud environment. There's so many problems that can be solved by using cloud technology, and there's so many opportunities there. But the problem with so many advantages and problem potential to be solved is staying focused on the right reasons. So we speak a little about being clear about why your organization is moving to cloud. There are many organizational objectives and pressures that drive cloud adoption. Sometimes it could be building moves, could be budget or financial model changes. You could be looking to change your talent acquisition by giving more digital tools and digital workloads into the business so you attract different future staff. There could be a broader desire in the organisation for cultural change that is going to be backed by digital implementations. There could be innovation and innovation initiatives. Or it might just be the strategic plans of someone's strategy to move to cloud. And we hear that a little bit, actually, that we have a cloud-first strategy. The problem with that statement is it's not a why, it's a what. It doesn't explain in that kind of one-liner why you have a cloud-first strategy, what you're hoping to achieve with cloud. So our recommendation is that you're clear as an organization about what you're hoping to achieve with the cloud implementation. And without that clarity, people are left to use their own understanding of the advantages and benefits of cloud to make their own assumptions that that's why you're putting in cloud. And then those assumptions start to form the direction that a project takes. They start to form design decisions and implementation choices. So if people believe that cloud exists or is being implemented for one of these kinds of reasons, and that's going to be their target and what they're aiming for in that project. But instead, if there's clarity in the organization of what cloud is going to achieve for the business as a whole, and that is communicated clearly and it's shared and everyone is aligned to that, then you can still recognize that there's benefits to be had. There's other benefits to be had along the way. Yes, there's problems that will be solved with cloud. There's advantages that can be taken advantage of. There's features that can be taken advantage of. But being clear and having a common outcome and purpose will be important to keep the project moving in the same direction as it takes twists and turns. And I'm not saying that organization agility is the reason to move to cloud or that that's the goal for every organization. In other cases, it can be something quite different, but having real clarity and communication around that to ensure that everybody is working towards the same thing. So this session was framed around organisation agility, and I think it's important just to think slightly into the future, and this is only slightly into the future, of what that organisation might look like. We believe that many modern orgs in the future will have a high degree of digital dexterity in their workforce, and that individuals will be empowered to execute on ideas themselves. We believe that people will be highly connected to peers, to staff, to customers, to partner ecosystems. And through all of those attributes, essentially they'll be able to deliver value sooner. And if we're talking about organisation agility, McKinsey & Company has done some research, and they have some guidance for organisations that are moving into a more agile structure. And they talk about moving the organisation from a machine-like structure into an organism-like structure, where there's smaller teams that are cross-functional skill sets, and those teams are feeling more empowered to achieve things. They're more safe, psychologically safe to work together. So as organisations struggle to change into those into that organisation as an organism model, we believe that technology can help in two major ways to help become more agile. The first is around digital collaboration. So tools, access to documents and data, collaboration platforms so that people can share ideas, can contribute to each other's draft work, they can build ideas or build upon ideas together. They can work in cross-functional teams even when they're not physically sitting together, so using digital to connect people when they're physically apart. And examples of those kinds of things might be, Office 365, Microsoft Teams, Slack, Facebook Workplace, those kinds of systems to bring people together to work in a different way. And then once people are working in a different way and they have all these great ideas on how to innovate in the organisation and how to be more efficient, then they need to be able to execute on those ideas. And this is where we feel that cloud comes in, not just as a platform for IT to make the servers a little more efficient or to make them a little bit easier to spin up or get going, but to actually empower people to have access to innovative digital solutions to implement the ideas that they've had working in a different way. And so we're thinking about faster access to AI, to a microservice-based architecture, even simple things like empowering people to do their own emails out to customer sets, etc., by using an agile cloud platform. So this is probably a really great segue to hand over to Jerome to go through what Olica's learned around our migrations of larger organizations to the Azure cloud platform, and what we bring to market, I suppose, to help customers make sense of how to get started in that journey, our 10 steps to Azure cloud. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for that, Michael. So our 10 steps to cloud really started with, and it might seem an interesting discussion, why have we spoken so far about finding the why of migrating to cloud? And that's because these 10 steps are born out of that question. They've come as we've worked with our customers, and we've had people in the customers, they've seen a reason to go, and they've seen what cloud can do for them, and they've said, well, can you help me sell cloud to the business? Can you help me explain this why as we go to the business. And so the 10 steps come out of that to go, okay, this is about, as we take that why and we then form it into some actionable steps that we can take to move up to the cloud on the way. And so this is not us sitting here in our ivory tower going, we know what you need to do in order to get to the cloud. This has come from us working with our customers and seeing what it is that they need as they're coming through in order to actually transition their organization to take advantage of cloud. And because of this, while we say here there are 10 steps, these steps themselves aren't fixed in the order that we have to go through them. We put them in a logical order, and the order that we have the 10 steps is the way that many of our customers will move as they go through. But they don't have to be done just in this order. It is possible to move some of them around depending upon that why, the question as to why are we moving to cloud. And as we do that, and as we adjust the steps to make the why happen, that then helps us become more successful in the migration, because now we've defined the why, we've defined a process, and we can come together as a team to work together to receive that outcome. And in doing that, we can then help you instill confidence within the business about this approach, that this is not some decision that's been made on a whim that there's been no thought into that's potentially going to upend the business, but we actually have confidence, we know what we're doing and where we're going to go. So at a high level, the 10 steps that we're going to look at this morning are server migration analysis, design, security and governance, the actual platform build, backup, site recovery or disaster recovery, migration, cost management and operational change, and the data platform as well, before we then move into the transformation and the optimization. And I'll address them through in this order, but as you'll see, some of these might actually happen at the same time. Some of these you might prioritize over others based upon that why and that call of where you want to go. So the first of the 10 steps is the server and application migration analysis. And really what this starts at doing is where we want the ability to know what's in the environment. The question we have here is, okay, what do we have? What are our servers? What are our applications? And this is some piece that's often gets missed, is we can have a tendency from a technical perspective to focus particularly on servers, because that's what, from technical side of things, we tend to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But the business doesn't tend to deal in servers. The business deals in applications. And so as part of this, we need to understand what our applications are, what your applications are, and which servers make up those applications. Because then in that analysis, we can organize to take an application at a time and think about how we can operate at the application level rather than just at the server level. And as we're looking at applications and their dependencies, we then look at the data services, the databases, the files, the systems that are used for that. The front ends, whether you're running IIS, web applications, or whether you have a client application. And then to understand things like file services and directory services, because as we understand what is there, we know what needs to be migrated. We need to understand where we can go. And when we then look ahead to the final, this 10th step, we can then look at how might we be able to transform these to improve the operation of your business. And so the output we'll get normally from this step is a migration analysis document. It's a readiness assessment to say, okay, where are we in terms of our applications? Where are we in terms of our servers about an ability just to take them to cloud, and what might be our best option as we migrate from there. Second of the steps is then to do a design. And this is key. We look at it and we go, okay, cloud, what is there? It's a lot of services. Why might I need to design it? Well, in a sense, Azure becomes a new data center, but it's more than just a data center. And you wouldn't go into a new data center without sitting down and designing it and understanding what your requirements are. And so in this step, what we do is we sit down and we have some workshops to understand the end state that we're going to work towards. And this will, again, be shaped by the why. And we broadly base this on two sets of designs. One is a core platform design, And this is, think of it like a data center design. What is the networking going to look like? What's the compute? What storage are we going to use? But within this, we also look at things like, how are we going to run cost optimization? What is the security that's going to be wrapped around the environment? How are the systems going to be integrated into our existing enterprise environment? And how are we going to monitor and manage the solutions ongoing and the services that we're using in an ongoing fashion? Because it's very easy for us to forget about some of those and to then reach that point once it's been implemented. Well, how are we going to look after these? So this needs to be considered in the design section of the steps of migration. But beyond just looking at the platform and how we're going to configure the connectivity and the authentication, we then also need to look at what services are we going to leverage? What can we use in the Azure environment in order to meet the why requirement of moving to cloud? And this is things like considering Azure SQL databases and managed instances, so that now we're moving away from having to maintain SQL Server, and we're now moving to a platform service. Azure App Services, again, for your front ends, for your websites and other front end services. So again, we're moving now to maintaining data, we're moving now to maintaining the core application code, and we're moving away from having to do the basic maintenance, and we can move to more strategic solutions. Things like Azure Files, which give us, again, the communication and reducing the number of servers that we're having to maintain, and building in additional resiliency on the way through. But then also considering a backup and a disaster recovery environment, and how, in moving to cloud, how do we then continue our backup solution? How do we restore as required? And how then do we recover in the event of a disaster? The third of the steps is to consider security and governance. And we've talked about this a little bit already as part of step 2. And that's because our security and governance will tend to be integrated into steps 2 and 4. And that's because as we're looking at the design, as we're considering the design of the environment, we need to consider the security of that environment on the way past. And so this is things like account provisioning, subscription controls. Who has access to be able to spin up resources, and what resources can they create in the cloud? About how do we track the usage and who's requested certain things, and then billing information so we know which part of our business is consuming the majority of the cost. So if we want to move towards a showback or a chargeback system where individual business units are responsible for their costs, that gives us the ability to do that. Some organizations want to move to that, other organizations don't. And that's where we need to look at this as part of the design, about how are we going to do this? What is the security? What are the governance controls we're going to put in play? And then as we move into the 4th step and we move into the platform build, how are we actually going to implement those security and governance controls? And so the 4th step is about a platform build. This is now going and taking our Azure environment and bringing it to the point where at the end of step 4, we have an environment where if a business unit comes and says, we need a new application, we need new service deployed, we need something new, that we're able to go and say, right, we can put that into Azure. If the goal of the organization is to migrate away from an on-premises environment, once we have the platform build completed, now we can deploy all new workloads into Azure and therefore not have to worry about migrating them from the legacy system. Or if we're looking to equip our business to be more agile and to take advantage of some of these tools, once the build is complete, now we're in the situation where they can come in and start taking advantage of these resources to do new things, while we then think about what we might want to do in the background with the existing services. And so this is about productionizing the Azure platform. It's about implementing the security and the governance controls that we've been through the design, establishing the identity, configuring the monitoring, configuring automation. Because one of the big things that cloud gives us is automation. It allows us to take that step back and move away now from having to go in and manually provision things, which gives us the agility, it gives us the increased speed and allows us to do more within the environment. And then about that is then about configuring, for example, tagging, which is how we can assign resources to certain groups. It's about how we can build in those cost controls and understand what's being used by whom and the different environments that we have within the Azure platform from there. Typically, we'll find those first 4 steps tend to be relatively linear. Obviously, there's some crossover in steps 2 through 4. From step 5 on, this is really where we now move to that point of these remaining steps are the ones that we will tend to put in different orders based upon the why and the what it is that you're looking to do. So we've spoken about the fact that we need to, when we move to the cloud, we need some way of continuing your backup environment. We can't just move it there and go, now we can forget about it all. We need the ability to recover should there be a massive failure in the cloud. And this comes to this is where we have from a backup perspective. And our recommendation as we move to cloud is to consider using the cloud native systems. And the key reason for this is they're integrated into the environment. They make it very, very simple, not only to do the backups, but also to do the restores and to get access to the data from there. But Azure Backup also has the advantage that it can be used not just for workloads running in Azure, but also for an on-premises environment as well. And so this is where we can start looking at, okay, if we're thinking of transitioning our environment, maybe we can start by transitioning a service like backup away from having to provision tapes, having to provision a lot of storage in order to hold that backup on premises. And now we start to leverage the scale that the cloud gives us by moving one workload back up into the cloud. Azure Backup is very simple to manage and maintain. There isn't the infrastructure. You don't have to worry about making sure you've provisioned enough disk space, enough IOPS on the disk, that your backup windows are long enough, that you've scheduled everything on the way at the right times to complete all your backups within the window before production comes along, because this is all managed for you now by Microsoft. But within that, we then still need to maintain a plan of historic data. Because once you start using Azure Backup, you have access from that point in time forward. But the question is, how do you then deal with the historic data? Is it feasible to ingest that into another system? Do we need to work out a way of keeping the current environment around? Or is there a solution that we can use to manage the restores of historic data that you might require for the duration of the life cycle that is required from there? And there are some backup systems that can leverage into Azure Backup automatically and extend the existing solution. And again, these are things that can be done on the way through as we understand the why and the environment that you have as we come through. Another area that we found organizations tend to jump in first with Azure and is a great place to start is with Azure as a disaster recovery environment. Because what we have, what Microsoft provide is a system, Azure Site Recovery, which allows us to replicate your on-premises environment into Azure and then leverage Azure as your disaster recovery environment. So a lot of organizations will have 2 data centers. They've had to buy 2 sets of servers and storage in order to be able to have the ability to fail over should they have a failure in their primary data center. And that becomes a sunk cost that doesn't have the same level of utilization as a production system. Whereas by leveraging the cloud, what you're doing is you're only paying for the storage of the virtual machines that are replicated, and then you only pay for the compute when you actually need to spin them up should you have a disaster recovery event. And so this can be a great place to get started in a cloud environment. And often we'll find organizations will bring this earlier because it allows them to decommission maybe a legacy infrastructure that is there in the disaster recovery environment because it's the old production equipment that is now well out of support and maybe it's due for maintenance renewal. If we want to replicate your on-premises machines, there is some infrastructure that is required, but it's very simple and it allows us to also migrate from on-prem and into the cloud. And so Microsoft suggests Azure Site Recovery as a migration tool because what we do is we replicate the virtual machines from your on-premise environment into the cloud. Everything is continuing to run, and then we fail them over as if we were doing a DR test, validate that everything works, and then with only a small outage, you've now migrated a running workload from your on-premises environment into the Azure cloud and can continue to run from there. Once it's been migrated, then we reconfigure the disaster recovery to another region so that you have that support as we go forward. And that leads us into the 7th of the steps here, which is considering migration. And so this is often a goal that we have from a lot of organizations, because what they want to do is they actually want to get out of their on-premises environment. Maybe it's because they're coming up for a hardware renewal. Maybe it's they don't want to have the overhead and the cost of running their own data center. And so the aim, therefore, is to migrate away from the on-premises environment. And within this step here, what we need to do is we need to leverage the analysis that was done in step 1 and then work with the app owners to know when we can schedule the cutover and whether we can do it either with no downtime, depending on the configuration of the app, or with a minimal downtime at a time that suits them. And this is where, as I was just mentioning, we leverage site recovery for that migration and cutover, because we can do a cutover of a production workload in less than an hour, because the replication has been happening while the app has been running in the background. But within this migration, this then touches on the 10th step, is there is the possibility then to actually start to transform in the migration and leverage platform services to gain resiliency, to gain other benefits that come, rather than then relying just on running a workload in a virtual machine. But the key thing within the migration process that we work with you is to ensure that your operational procedures and your team are ready for a new way of operating. Because while you might be used to being able to get in and see the console of a virtual machine, once it migrates to cloud, you now have an abstraction because somebody else is taking care of that. There are changes about how the process needs to work, and we work with you and with your team to understand what these new changes are and how you go about troubleshooting issues should you have problems now running in the cloud, which you have to then take a different method on the way through for that troubleshooting. One of the key steps for every organisation as we work through is cost management and operational change. We've talked a little bit there about the operational change as we do the migration, because within that migration, the procedures change. The team needs to be trained about how do I now raise a service request? Where do I go looking for information about performance? What kind of changes can I make around performance if we're having trouble? These procedures will change from what you would be doing in your on-premises environment. But tied tightly in with that is the cost management aspect, because it's very easy and we're accustomed to vendors coming in and saying, we want you to give our application, which is presenting a small website, 74 cores of CPU, and we need 450 gigabytes of RAM. And we look around and we go, well, actually, no, it doesn't need that. We need to look at actually what it is. And when you move to, when you're on-prem, the cost of running a large virtual machine like that can be hidden. You're not looking at the true cost of running it because you've paid for a certain amount of compute and a certain amount of storage. And if you're not using it in a specific VM, our hypervisors are very clever and will allocate those resources to other machines. But once we move to cloud, you'll build for exactly what it is that you say that you want. And so within the cost management, we need to look at the actual utilization of your environment to make sure that you're running with the most efficient environment that you possibly can. But this comes into procedures about, okay, predicting, are there times where we can turn off environments that we might have left running all the time? Do we know that this application has busy periods and quiet periods, and so we can predictively resize the environment prior to the busy periods so that we're not paying for all the compute that it needs in a small period of time and reducing our costs at the rest of the time? Setting budgets and thresholds so that we're not surprised at the end of the month when the bill comes in about how much it's cost us to run our environment. Is often, again, at this time where we sink costs in an organization into buying physical infrastructure, but we then don't work out on a month-by-month basis what that's costing us to run. And so when you migrate to a cloud environment, initially it can seem like we're paying a lot of money, but because we're not seeing how we've previously sunk costs. So understanding the budgets and the thresholds so that we're not surprised at the end of what it's costing us to run. And then as part of that, integrating the cost management, the right sizing, the evaluation of our environments into the regular operations of the business so that we don't just pick something, figure it's going to be good for the next 6 months, and then come back at a later stage. But we're actually constantly evolving, constantly evaluating as part of standard procedure any changes that might be needed for the environment. The ninth step that we consider is then our data platform. And what we're looking at here is now tied in tightly with what we're going to look at as step 10 about transformation, is now starting to consider where can we take advantage of what cloud offers for us. Because it's very possible to use the cloud just like another data center. We have an environment, we spin up the virtual machines that we require, and we run everything as we have done in the past. But the real revolution that comes with cloud is the fact that now at scale, we can actually start to move our environments away from us having to manage the whole stack from the ground up. So as we move to infrastructure as a service, we're now moving out the hypervisor and the storage, and somebody else is taking care of that for us. As we move further up and as we consider data platforms, we're now saying what we're going to do is take the next stage and we're going to manage just the data and let somebody else take care of managing the platform on which the data sits. But tied in with that is saying, well, actually, there are multiple ways that data can be stored, and there are better ways of storing that data than necessarily just in a relational database. For some applications, the relational database is the way to go, and then we go, well, can we move that to a native service like Azure SQL? And we use tools like the data migration service in Azure to understand what we can migrate out of your SQL Server environments and what target we can use, whether we can use a SQL database or whether we need to go to a managed instance, or whether we do need to stay with SQL on infrastructure as a service. But Azure is not just Windows. We can migrate your other databases if you've got PostgreSQL or MySQL as data backends. They can be migrated. Or we can look at file services and go, okay, maybe the file shares that we have at the moment could be better migrated to something like Azure Files, which gives us an unlimited, a much larger amount of storage, fundamentally unlimited in the background, that somebody else is taking care of, someone else can organize the archiving, someone else is controlling the backups. And then we only have the local data, the data synchronized locally that we're actively working on. But it means we don't have to continue to provision storage. Or maybe we move towards something like OneDrive or SharePoint. Again, migrating the files out and providing additional functionality about how we access those files and what that allows us to do as an organization as well. And within this is then establishing the processes as we bring new applications on board. How are we going to take advantage of the tools that the cloud provides for us to best leverage and to reduce the work that we need to do from a maintenance perspective so that we can then focus on the more transformational aspects of the business. And that leads us into the 10th of the steps. But for some organizations, this is the step that will come as part of the design and as one of the drivers into cloud, is the ability to transform and to innovate in our application environments. And so this starts out by moving away from just running virtual machines to leveraging the platforms that the cloud providers and Azure provide around things like analytics and understanding more about what's going on in our applications and where the trouble points might be so that we can improve those and thereby increase the uptime of the environment and the experience that our users and our customers have when they're using our services. To leverage things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to get into our data and find patterns that otherwise we might not see. And this can be used in two ways. One is to surface data and relationships between our data that allow us to more effectively serve our customers, or alternatively to use things like chatbots, which allow us to then have a natural language interface where users can actually self-serve with a lot of their support requirements and requests and find the information that they need without having to call the service desk at a time that suits them, without service desk then having to be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How else can we integrate our environments together with services that connect one application to another to feed data between them, so that instead of now having to have a manual process where we're entering data, the same data into 3 different systems, it goes into one and then via the power of the cloud moves that data across the different systems for consistency and in a much faster time frame from there. And then leveraging the different storage technologies that are available for us as well. Things like data lakes, where we can bring a lot of your data together and then use that machine learning to find those relationships that might be otherwise hidden within the environment that can be surfaced and actually transform the way that we do business. And that can be what sets us apart as a business from our competitor down the street, is making better use of the data that we already have on our customers, making better use of the data that we already have on our processes. And so it's this transformation for a lot of customers will be the driving force of cloud and may be prioritized. For others, it can certainly just be, we want to be out of our data center. We want a platform where we don't have to buy a certain amount every 3 years. And this is why there are multiple paths or approaches to getting to the cloud. We can take these 10 steps and we can mix and match them and do the 6 that makes sense for your business to address your why. We can change the order of them around to deliver the best value for your business initially. And then once the platform has been proven and the why has been established, then leverage other technologies on the way through. So for example, in the first flow there may be a priority about getting the data platforms reorganized so that we have better insight to our data. But for the second flow, it might be more about getting off an on-prem environment and the backup requirements, because the number of servers has grown and the backup requirements have grown such that we actually can't afford to, we don't want to have to go out and buy more disks for the SAN. So how do we then leverage cloud to get in and solve that pain point? Once we've solved that, then we come back and start looking at how else can we do and what other advantages have we got that cloud can give for us. And so this is the thing when it comes to our approach for a cloud migration. We say that there are 10 steps to cloud, and it makes it sound like it's a specific process that you have to go through step 1 all the way to step 10. And unless you do all 10 steps, you're not going to be there. That's not the way that it works. There is no right or wrong way to get into the cloud, because it's going to be driven by the why of the business. And so this is why even this process, these 10 steps, is something that we're constantly evolving. We're currently on the second revision of these 10 steps because we've seen how customers need to move, and then with how the cloud has changed and the new options that have come on board, how else and where are the other benefits and the other things that need to be taken consideration of as we start to develop that for the cloud. And so we will continue to revise the steps as the business needs change and as our customers' needs change and as what we have available to us changes. But the big thing to start looking at is that when we move to cloud, it's considered more than just the virtual machines. Yes, we can take them, and yes, there is benefit in doing that. But the true benefit of cloud comes from the transformation abilities that we can bring as we move through. But ultimately, as we summarize the 10 steps, it's down to a case of planning. Because the more we plan at the beginning, the more we understand the requirements, the more we understand your why, the better we can tailor this approach to meet your requirements as you move to cloud. And at that stage, I'll hand back now to Michael.
Thank you, Jerome. Okay, so just a very short summary, I guess, from me, and then we can be on our way to lunch. So maybe not so much a summary, but more of a observation of some of the key points there from my perspective. And you know, hopefully some of these might stick with you and they can influence your thinking. There really are some new rules with cloud. It's an evolutionary journey that got us to here, but there is a revolutionary opportunity if you actually embrace it to its potential. But to do that, you need to allow yourself to break down some of the old rules of architecture and change some of your thinking about what's possible. As Jerome has said, our 10 steps are a logical, loose framework. Which is the right path for you? Well, you need to focus on your why to cloud. And cloud definitely is not all about IaaS. I think that's becoming very much understood, but actually embracing all of the cloud native services, the PaaS services, is still something that a lot of organizations haven't done a lot of. So we all know that's the destination. And I guess my encouragement there is to embrace it, the cloud native services, sooner than later. And speaking of cloud native services, databases fit into that category as well. And there's more than one reason. It's more than just around performance and scalability reasons to move to a PaaS database. There's many different kinds of databases, and picking the right one for your needs and the right mix of them. Actually, it's not standardizing in one, but allowing yourself to have a mix of database types, which will allow you to design applications and technology to be more performant or more the right kind of database for the right kind of application, I suppose. We haven't gone deeply into the detail of microservices in this session, but there is a new way of thinking that's emerging around providing a library of services to everyone in an organization. Many of those may be implemented through API interfaces. And if you think about re-architecting those monolithic applications into microservice architecture, then there's a clear development path there. But I'd like to influence you to also think about how you can make cloud services available to more users that aren't deeply IT savvy as well. There's a lot of opportunity there if you can manage to find your path through that. And there's definitely no finish line or goal here. This is a continual improvement program. Moving to cloud isn't about moving and you're done. It's only the beginning. So organizations must adapt to the new market to be able to respond to competitors or to be the disruptors. And they're struggling to change the agility in the organization, moving from a machine to an organism. We believe technology is a key enabler of the agile DNA, both in the digital platforms and the cloud platforms. And so if you think about moving into that more agile organization, how does cloud help you become more agile? Here's a few takeaways from our perspective. It helps by making cloud services more available so you can democratize the power of that and get it out to not just IT. There's a little hard to put in context here, but when we write purpose is fluid, don't assume too much. What I'm really getting at here is we are used to, when we're designing systems, we want to go and do in the old school way. We needed to be very clear and thorough, I suppose, that we've captured all of the reasons that someone might, or all the objectives that they have in a new piece of technology, and we cater for that up front. A lot of that thinking came because it was hard to change later. We had hardware to buy, etc. So just remember, you don't need to get it all 100% right now, and you don't need to know all the things yet. Get started. Don't make all these pre-assumptions, because you'll be able to implement a little bit, test, adjust, learn. And on that point, which bits do you do first? Well, focus on business value first. The things that deliver value sooner are always going to keep the momentum of projects going faster. So focus on that first. You don't have to do it all at once. Little pieces that deliver value and iterative improvements. I haven't spoken so much about it in today's session, but I often talk about not making anchors. Anchors hold you back. Their legacy often, they're things that have dependencies on other things. And you might not make all your decisions right the first time. Be open to adjusting and changing, but try not along the way to make things that will hold you back in the future. All software that's dependent on particular versions of other things or operating systems, those are examples of those anchors. So you want to try to unwind some of those, pull them up, pull them out, and don't make any more. AWS actually speaks about the concept of a one-way door or a two-way door. So when you're making a decision, understand, is this a door that you can come back through and kind of undo that decision, or is this a one-way door that you can't undo? If it's a one-way door, it might need more thinking and more, understanding of the landscape. If it can be reversed, then it might be okay for now. You can always come back and revise it later. Microservices are key to making independent and scalable services on the cloud. So have that mindset when you're tackling the transformation elements, especially on top of the cloud platforms. Don't make big monolithic applications that have one function only. Break them down and assume that pieces can be reused for other things in the future. And when you architect like that, you'll actually find that the business logic is actually more put into the orchestration layers rather than having business logic in apps per se. So if an app is actually an assembling of many microservices, then how you assemble and orchestrate it is actually the business logic there. So it's just a little change in mindset of how you think about the translation between what the business needs and how you implement it with technology. And the last little tip, I guess, here around being agile, we talk about APIs a lot. We want API access to data. We want to be able to call on algorithms through APIs that have unique knowledge in them. And we also want to be able to use APIs to interact with and extract data out of and put data into SaaS applications. But just a little word of warning there, not all APIs are created equal. So just because a SaaS application says that it has APIs, you've got to go a little bit deeper and understand the scope and limitations of those APIs. And we will, there's a question there which I'll cover in 1 second, but just a parting thought here is Satya Nadella speaks about Microsoft needing to meet the unmet and unarticulated needs of the customer. And I think this is apt when we're thinking about cloud, because the business today doesn't understand the power of cloud or what is possible. And you need to invent the possibility with them and actually change how the organization works. If you wait for them to articulate their needs and then you find the clear path of how cloud solves that need, it's a little too late. There is an opportunity to use the cloud to help deliver more innovation and more possibility with them before they've managed to articulate it, what they require. All right. So thanks for joining, everyone. We do have a question there which we'll run through, and if anyone else has any more questions, feel free to write them up. What's that one? I can't quite read it.
So the question is in regards to replatforming after finishing a lift and shift migration. The question is, can you migrate the SQL servers to Azure SQL managed instances or Elastic Pool SQL? Yes, absolutely. So we can either migrate to Platform as a Service SQL during the migration from your on-premises environment into Azure, or migrate the SQL servers as they are, and then once they're in Azure, then migrate them over to a platform service. The same applies for any of the transformation stages on the way through. It's always possible to do a lift and shift first and then come back and do the transformation. And the question about which way to do it is going to depend upon your why and your reasons for migrating. So if you have a hard deadline because of licensing requirements or the need to get out of a building or a data center by a specific point in time, then it makes a lot of sense to do the lift and shift migration first and then to come back round and do the transformation after the fact. But if you've got the time, it's generally better to do the transformation during the migration, because then you're only touching the application once in that process, rather than coming back and touching it again and having a second outage, because that adds extra downtime and it adds additional cost to the process. But absolutely, you can do it in 2 stages if that's what the business necessity is. And maybe the other necessity might be a confidence factor. We want the ability to go to take it to the cloud, and then once we're there and once we start to understand the benefits, then we want to take that opportunity to do the transformation.
Yeah, I was going to add to that as well, Jerome. Absolutely agree. Sometimes it's about getting the skills of your IT organization and even the mindset, kind of trusting and being comfortable with operating in the cloud, and sometimes just lift and shift is a way to help with that. Although it doesn't mean that every application needs to be lift and shifted. Maybe some can be, and then more complex ones where there potentially is a lot more benefit in re-architecting the platform. Possibly they can just come in that kind of transformation move as well. But yeah, I agree. All right. If there's no other questions, I think we'll wrap it up there and let everyone get back to their work and lunch. Thanks for joining, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any more questions after we finish this webinar. Thanks. Bye.